Ich spreche ein bisschen mehr als ein bisschen, aber ich mache viele Fehler. So, heute sprechen wir eigentlich auf English. All right, so we're going to talk today about content and chaos, and specifically the kind of chaos it always seems to cause within our web projects. Now, this first slide here is actually an example of some of my favorite chaos. It's from South Philadelphia, where I live. This is a place called the Philadelphia Magic Gardens, and they were built by this crazy old hippie artist named Isaiah Zagar, who moved to the neighborhood in the 60s when they wanted to tear it down to build an expressway. But the hippies moved in, and they fought against them tearing it down, and finally the neighborhood stayed. And along the way, he got this empty lot on South Street, and he built this, what he calls the Magic Gardens. Now, there's a lot of things I actually don't like about the Magic Gardens. They're kind of ugly. It's just this ramshackle, empty lot full of old bottles and bike tires and kind of just garbage that's all been merged together with concrete and mosaic. It's kind of too many things all at once. It's this big jumble of a piece of art. But in a lot of ways, this actually embodies all of the things that I love about Philadelphia. Because Philadelphia itself is this big jumble of stuff. Philly is just as much Ben Franklin as it is Rocky. It's just as much, huge monuments to these 19th century industrialists with all of this wealth as it is these incredibly diverse immigrant neighborhoods. It's a place where in the past 20 years or so, the Italian market has become mostly Mexican, and it's the best place to buy tortillas in town. So it's a city that's kind of beautiful and shambling at the same time. And I've lived there for a couple of years, and I love it. But there's something that I don't love about Philadelphia, and that is that it's filthy. This is Broad Street. This is about 2 blocks from where I get on the subway. And what you can see in this photo is a pretty typical example of the kind of garbage you see on the streets in Philly all over the place. You might see some leftover fast food wrappers and plastic bags, that kind of typical trash. You'll also see abandoned clothing, and even there's like a mattress leaned up against a pole down there. And it's all over the place. And it's not just me who finds this a problem. This is something that we've got lots and lots of articles written about. I started looking up different pieces in the media about how dirty Philly was, and I found articles dating back to 1990 talking about the trash problem and how much litter was on the streets and whose fault it was. Now, of course, when you look at a problem like litter in a city, everybody has somebody that they blame, right? It's very easy for people to point the finger at someone else. There's the people who say it's the sanitation workers, and that they're careless, and they let trash fall all over the place when they come around and pick it up every week. They're the people who blame it on pet owners. They say that people walking their dogs are careless and don't pick up after their animals. They say that it's the kids who are coming home from school who get their fountain drinks and then just throw them on the ground when they're done. Sometimes it kind of smacks of racism or classism, because it's always those people. It's those other people whose fault it is that the city is covered in garbage. And a lot of people end up just ignoring it. They just say, I just don't think about it that much. But of course, the city doesn't want this to happen, right? The city wants to keep it clean. So they have all these campaigns for that. They have this whole series of campaigns called Unlitter Us, and they're all over the subways and all the trash cans around the city. And they say that cleaner streets are going to be safer streets. It's going to be better for the city if we keep it clean. And these are everywhere. And it's not just ads, we've also got laws. Of course, there's a whole section of the city code that's devoted to refuse and littering. And it says that, no person shall place or deposit litter and blah, 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 blah. And it's pretty straightforward, right? Like, it actually isn't that hard when you think about it. Stop leaving trash on the ground. Pick up after yourself. When you take your trash out to the curb every week, make sure that it's secured. It's not that hard to stop littering, but they don't call it Philadelphia for nothing. They do call it that. It's true. But here's the thing. I don't just love Philly, and I'm not just here today to talk about Philly. I also love the web, and I love content. I'm a content strategist. I'm an editorial person, so in addition to working with clients, I also am the editor of A List Apart. I work with content all the time. I knew that I would be a writer probably from the time that I was 6 or 7 years old. And I love that the way that the web has enabled us to publish and share. I love content. But I think that a lot of our websites are covered in garbage too. I think that a lot of our websites look a lot worse than my walk to the subway in Philly. In fact, pretty recently, I was just kind of going about my business using the web, and I came upon something that just stopped me in my tracks. And it was here on Verizon's site. Now, I don't think that you have Verizon in this part of Europe, but in the US, it's kind of a parallel competitor to like AT&T or T-Mobile for your cellular service and data, right? And so I was trying to decide. I was trying to decide whether I was going to stay with AT&T or move to T-Mobile because they have all this international stuff that's great. And I thought, you know, I should really see what Verizon is doing. I should inform myself about my options. And so where do I go? I go to their website, of course. And so I'm here, and I'm on the landing page for businesses, and I'm trying to take a look at what their options are. And as I start scrolling down this page, pretty quickly as I hit scroll downward, I hit this section that's called Trending Now, whatever that means. And I look at it, and the first thing that catches my eye is this stock photography. Like, where do you even get stock photography like that? This funnel with these letters in it? Like, I don't know where that comes from. I don't know who made that. I don't know why they made that. I wonder if this was a custom photo shoot, which would be even better and more horrible. I don't know, but I stop and I look at it, and I go, why does Verizon care about my business's metadata? What does that have to do with me buying a new cell phone plan? What's going on with that funnel? Why is any of this happening? But since I'm a content nerd, I get kind of intrigued, especially they start talking about metadata. I think a lot about metadata, and I'm like, well, what would Verizon have to say about metadata? So I, of course, click in, and I'm in the rabbit hole. As I'm in this site, and I'm starting to read this article about metadata, of course I realize it's a garbage article about metadata. And I'm not trying to put down the person who wrote this article. I can assure you the person who wrote this article was handed this assignment from some editorial calendar that somebody dreamed up because of some SEO keywords that somebody thought was important, and they said, we got to put this stuff on the website. And that person was like, okay, I've got 3 hours budgeted to write an article about metadata. And so you read it, and it's like, metadata is simply data about data, and if you manage it right, it will help your business grow. It doesn't say anything actually valuable about, like, how you would go about getting metadata or how you actually would implement metadata within some sort of back-end system, because how could it? It's on the Verizon website. I'm here to shop for a data plan. Of course it's not a good article about metadata. It's just stuff. But of course, once I've been on this page, as I'm trying to go back to the product section, I realize the navigation has changed entirely. I'm no longer on the regular Verizon site. I'm now in something called the Solutions Lab. And I'm like, oh, well, that sounds like science. Solutions Lab. Okay, so let's click on the Solutions Lab. So I click on the main home button there on the Solutions Lab, and I end up on this page. I'm going to read you just a couple of the headlines that are shown here. Secure Shop Register Validate FAQ. Prepare now for small business taxes. Verizon and American Banker Finance Video. The biggest mobile tech trends for 2015. And I'm like, what a hodgepodge collection of crap this is. I don't know what most of this means. I have no idea who wants to watch a Verizon and American Banker Finance video or how that would possibly help me as a customer. So I don't know what this is. I don't know who it's for. I don't know what all these little boxes really mean or what kinds of content they're going to bring me to. I don't know why any of this exists, but because I'm a masochist, I keep going. Keep going. So I click on the first thing. This is the most recent thing that had been added. It's the Verizon Secure Shop Register Validate FAQ. The first thing it says on this page, or underneath that, is common questions about the service that helps you save. I read that, and I'm like, I hope the first FAQ is, what the hell does the service that helps you save even mean? So I keep going. I'm gonna make it all the way to the end here. And so I click through that. I click this little download button, and I download it. I get a PDF, which is what most people want most of the time on the web. I know, PDFs, right? And I'm looking at this PDF of FAQs, and as I'm starting to read through this PDF of FAQs, it's all written in absolute jargon, right? Like, all of it is written with all of these weird buzzwords, and I don't know who this is for. But my favorite FAQ is the last FAQ. Okay, I'm ready to get started. How do I submit the necessary information? That is not an FAQ, you guys. That is a very poorly veiled call to action to sign up with a rep, right? I get all the way down to the end of this really crappy PDF, down this really crappy rabbit hole, and they're like, you're ready to sign up, right? And I'm kind of like this. Really? Like, really? And I get it, like, I'm not the audience for Secure Shop, Register, Validate, FAQ. I still don't really know what it means, to be honest. But I have to wonder, as I start messing around in these sites, as I start digging deeper in, who are they making this for? How much time and how much money was spent and continues to be spent on content like this? How much time and energy is spent building complex information architecture structures to support content like this? And how many people are getting lost along the way? How many people are getting into something like this solutions lab and going, I don't know what the hell I'm doing here, and just leaving? Why is all of this even happening? Why is content always so difficult to do well? And why does it seem like we're always facing the same problems? Because I don't think it's just Verizon. That would be easy, right, to just like pick on a company. But it's not them. I talk to people all the time who work at big companies, at universities, who work in government, who work at even smaller organizations, even sometimes people who work at startups where they don't even have that much content. And they always say, you know, it's always late. We never know what we're trying to say. Despite the fact that we don't know what we're trying to say and we can't get our hands on the content, when the content does show up, there's like 10 times as much as we expected. It's never mobile ready. It's never optimized for anything. Most of the time, it's a PDF that comes from 1999. And we don't know what to do about it. I think that a lot of websites, underneath the surface, even of the most beautifully designed sites, they're chaotic. The content that they have is just a mess. And I think about that, and for a while I got a little sad. I was like, what is going on here? Because I'm a content strategist. Like, that is my entire job, is to help people solve problems like this. I spend all of my time helping organizations figure this out. And I'm not the only one, mind you. There's a lot of people involved in content strategy now. It's become this big discipline, and all of these people talking about it, and all of them are very busy trying to help organizations figure out their content messes. And it's not just those of us who call ourselves content people. It's actually a lot of people like you. I bet in the last few years, a huge ton of you have started thinking a lot more about content and asking tougher questions about content within your projects. It's coming up a lot. And I think that we're spending a lot of time telling people how to make their content better. I think we're spending a lot of time producing like documents and recommendations that are like, here's all the ways in which your content is going wrong right now. I'm sure some of you have done things like content audits or assessments to try to get your arms around the beast that you're working with and identified some of these problems that Verizon has. So we put together these reports, or these recommendations. We tell people all the ways that they're doing it wrong. And sometimes we'll end up with these policies too, these plans and rules that end up looking a lot like Philly's litter ordinance. No person shall place or deposit PDFs and this, blah, blah, blah. And I think that that seems like a good idea to us, right? Because we know how to design and make websites that work for users. We know how to make content work on the web. And so we try to say, here's how to do it right. Just do this. But the problem is that despite all of that, despite all of this interest in content, all of this renewed focus on content, you'll still end up in that meeting halfway through the project where somebody says, actually, we can't get rid of any of those things because they're all needed because this person from this department said that they had to stay there, and we can't fight them because if we get in an argument with them, then we're going to have to go talk to the CEO, and they're just going to take their side anyway, so we can just leave it exactly as it is right now. Or you get the person who says, you know, that's great, that's really great, I love all the work that you've done here with the design. The CEO still wants to have her letter on the homepage, though, so can you just make some space for that? It seems like even though we have really good intentions about content, and I trust that you all have good intentions about content, like that's a conversation that has happened in the web community the last few years, it still ends up oftentimes feeling like this game of whack-a-mole, where you're like, okay, I'm gonna solve all the content problems this time, bam, right, bam, and you keep trying to hit all those content problems over and over and over again. But like a game of whack-a-mole, you never really keep up, right? You just keep the moles at bay a little bit longer, and then they come at you faster and faster, and eventually you lose. And that's what it often feels like. It feels like no matter what you try, the chaos always sort of seems to win eventually. And that's why whenever I talk about content with designers and developers, they roll their eyes and go, oh my God, why is it so hard? It's hard because it feels like this thing that you can't always keep up with. And because of that, I think it's time we actually take a little bit different approach to the work we do with content. Because I think that this idea of being able to fix content on the web is exhausting. It sure exhausts me. And I think it exhausts all of these people that we work with and work for, right? It exhausts all those marketing managers, and it exhausts all those people who manage the different product lines and program lines and department admins. All of these people in all of these different capacities who are putting their stuff on the website, it's exhausting for them too, to constantly be told they're doing it wrong. So instead of trying to fix everything, what I've started to do is think about content and think about the organizations that we work with and think about the websites that we make as a result as something that's complicated, as something that is a big system. In a lot of ways, it's like a city. This is, again, a picture of South Philly. This is pretty close to where I live. And cities, like Philly, and all cities really, they have infrastructure. They have systems within them. But they are chaotic. They're messy and imperfect. All of the pieces don't move at all at the same time. When you try to change something within a city, if you want to change how traffic flows through a city, if you want to get people to stop littering within a city, you have to change a lot of little things over a long period of time and then make the pieces sort of line up later on. It's not like you can just come in and do everything all at once, right? And the same is true within an organization, and the same is true within the content that they're producing. It's not going to work if we just try to tell people they're doing it wrong and then fix it for them. We can't just like cling tightly to that whack-a-mole mallet and tamp down all the content problems. But what we can do, and what I think is a lot more helpful and a lot more sustainable for us, is if we figure out how we're going to turn our projects into catalysts for content. So how do we make our projects, the web projects that we work on, an opportunity to improve content for the longer term and make people actually care about fixing their own content messes as opposed to looking for the next redesign to solve the problem for them? So I'm going to talk about a few ways that I've found that really helps me do that, and that I think all of you can adopt as well in whatever role that you're in. The first one I want to talk about is how we can make change feel achievable for people. Because I think this is one of the big problems, is change feels difficult. And I know this when people talk about litter in Philly. This is a quote from one of these articles that I read about the litter problem, where a woman said, you know, I've always been a trash picker-upper, but there are neighborhoods that are just too heavily covered for a person to pitch in while walking. When I read that, what I hear is that I've given up. I've given up because it's demoralizing to try to deal with this every day. And I think that this is really common. I think people want to do a good job. People don't want to live in garbage. But when things feel big, they feel like you just can't even start. And so you stop trying. So as I started reading about this, I started reading about some women who are doing something a little bit different. And there's these two women, Anya and Emily Doley, who they're in that photo. And what they're doing is they're trying to change things where they live in North Philadelphia, this place called West Rockland Street. So they've launched this thing called the West Rockland Street Project. And what they're calling it is a citizen-driven effort to revitalize one Philadelphia city block. Now, they're not trying to fix Philly. They're not even trying to fix North Philly. They're not even trying to fix Germantown, which is the neighborhood of North Philly they live in. They're trying to fix their block, just theirs. Because if you try to do too much at once, everybody just gives up along the way. So what they're doing is they're getting all of their neighbors involved right where they live. So they're getting people together to pick up the trash and do the work right around them. Because they're trying to say, we can't change everything, but we can change this. This is a thing we can do, and we'll notice the difference once it's done. And I think the same is true in our work, right? Like, big problems feel large. And when we start working on a design or development project, a lot of times what we bring up are content problems that feel pretty big to people, right? Like, we go in with this grand idea, and then we say, okay, well, all you have to do is rewrite everything. That's all, just everything. Or we go in and we say, you know, all of this is going to be really difficult to deal with on mobile. Can we just cut it all in half? We just need all of the content to be half the length, okay? Or to get back to my personal bane, which is the PDFs, right? And it's like, we have 4,567 of them, but we're just going to transform all of them into structured content. And people hear this, like people hear about the implications of the design and development work that we propose. And to be honest, that's hard for them. Like, they can't handle it all at once, right? It makes everybody feel defeated. So what I try to do is look for ways that I can avoid that sense of overwhelm. Ways that I can help people feel like they can actually do something and they're not going to pass out with a heart attack at the change. And the way that I do that is I make sure, just like Emily and Anya Doley are in Philly, that I'm starting with just one thing. What's one thing that we can actually affect change on? And the way that I identify that thing with content is to start looking for some characteristics. I want to find something that's visible, valuable, and scopable. So when I talk about visible, what I'm looking for is something that's like causing pain right now within an organization. Is there something that users are complaining about? Is there something that's frustrating internal teams who have to use the CMS and there's like one specific function within there that's always a disaster? Is there something that's really time-wasting? What you're really looking for here is the eyesore, right? Like, where's that litter-covered abandoned lot? The thing that everybody on the block says, that's ugly. Start with that. And then I'm looking for something that's going to be valuable as well. So is there something that would improve flow from like an initial part of the site into some sort of success metric, some sort of purchase or something like that? Is there something that would cut down on the internal time it takes to make content updates, that would cut down on how much money they're spending on producing content internally? What's something that you can tie some sense of value to help sort of get people behind making a change? And then I want to look for something that's scopable. And when I say scopable, I don't mean like scoped out over the next year. I don't mean rewrite all of the things. I mean, what's something that can be completed in a reasonable period of time, within weeks or a couple of months? Not something that's going to make people toil away. Because they need to be able to start seeing some of the results of their effort if you want to keep them engaged. So I'm really looking at this. I'm looking at this place on a project where your skills, whatever it is that your skills are and whatever you're influential about within an organization, where that aligns with this content problem that they're having right now. And that's your little sweet spot where a good place to start is. So like, for example, what if you are, like many, many organizations, trying to adapt an existing site to responsive design? And so you're like, okay, we got to rebuild a lot of stuff. There's a lot of rethinking we're doing. We're making things modular. We're kind of breaking things down. We've got this design pattern library we're working with, right? So let's say that you're leading that charge. And everybody's very excited, and they're like resizing their browser window, and you're talking to executives who like just read a Fast Company article last week and learned what responsive design was. And so you're in that boat, right? And you're like, yeah, we're doing this. People want to do this. So let's say along the way, you might identify that there's 4,567 PDFs on this website. That's a lot of stuff to deal with. But maybe you find one thing within there that's actually really, really the biggest pain point. Like, for example, what if you've got all these product specs? And I've seen this a lot in a lot of companies that you would not expect it, where really important product information is locked away in these documents. What if you just took those, and built out a content model for them? And said, here's how we're going to chunk this out and modularize it and organize it within responsive design and make whatever little charts work and actually build this out into a repeatable, structured content model for just this one kind of content. It's just a piece of the overall mess, right? But that's something that you could actually get buy-in for because it's something you know about, and it's something that probably causes a lot of pain. If every time a new product comes out, somebody has to go through and like make a new PDF, and then they send it to somebody else, and that person puts it in the CMS, and then that product becomes outdated, but nobody forgets to take it off the website, and so later on there's just too much stuff. Like those kinds of processes that just kill internal resources are a great place to find something to start with. What it really comes down to is that it's tempting to want to fix everything, right? Like people who are designers and developers love solving problems. Like you want to get in there and fix all of the things that you can find wrong and get down to the root cause. we're always trying to design a clean system and user-friendly interactions and blah, blah, blah. So of course we see all of the problems that exist. But it's a lot more productive when we say, you know what, let's focus on fixing something and really fixing that one thing so that we can help people actually see what it would be like to deal with their content in a different way. Because it's those little changes that actually make people feel optimistic, that actually make people feel a little bit more excited about dealing with the web in the future. Because it saves them time and energy, and it improves their sort of overall morale for a project. Which brings me to the next thing, which is ownership. So I talk about ownership because I think it's very easy to get into this mode of waiting for somebody else to come along and solve your problems. And you see it everywhere, right? You see it people in Philly waiting for somebody else to come pick up the litter. So back up there on West Rockland Street, people are not waiting for somebody else to come solve the problem. What they've started doing is organizing and taking real ownership of the future of their block. And it's not just Emily and Anya, the women who started this project. What they've done is they've gotten the community involved to start making decisions about which projects to pursue. The image in the bottom right is where they've actually gotten together and they started voting on how they're going to go about tackling projects in their neighborhood. They're getting organized and they're taking on more and more stuff, right? Whether it's a community garden or rebuilding a piece of pavers on the street or whatever it is. Because they're going to stop waiting and they're going to start doing. Because they own it and it's their neighborhood. And that's the mentality that we need in our projects, right? We need more people besides just us in the room who care about this stuff. We need more of all those content people to actually feel like this is something that they can be involved in and fix. I really like this quote from Livia Labat, who was recently at Marriott. She left a couple months ago. But she led the UX team there while they were working through this massive responsive redesign project where they were trying to get all of Marriott hotels, this massive chain, to move over to responsive. And one of the things that she talks about is how it wasn't just enough to have one team that's the responsive team and have that team just go and make the sites responsive. Because the organization wasn't going to learn anything from that process. And she says, you know, we have so many people today that are contributing to these sites. How are we going to get to a place where all of those people feel equipped with responsive design? Not just the little responsive team that comes along and fixes the problem. And I think that this is definitely applicable to content as well. This level of ownership and sharing ownership across an organization is critical because content is often changed the most and the most often by the most number of people within the company. So how do I get people to commit? How do I get people to really take that ownership and lead? The first thing that I do is I ask them instead of telling them. So instead of telling them all the stuff that they're doing wrong, I get them involved in a project very early on. And I help them figure out what their problems are and what they would like to do about them. I say, how do you think we could solve this problem? What do you think would improve this? Sometimes these are folks who are not necessarily experts at dealing with the web. They're content people who come from a background that was more marketing focused or based in print or whatever it was. And they're not always really advanced when it comes to coming up with web content solutions. But when I ask them how they would tackle the problem, when I ask them what they think is most important to do, suddenly they're invested. Suddenly their opinion matters. And suddenly I can get them to actually take action. Which is when I get them together. And I make sure that we're not just talking about what we're going to do with content, that I'm having them actually start making decisions about content. This is a workshop that I did a few months ago where we were actually working through a taxonomy problem. The problem was there's this existing website, and this site had a lot of content. So it had like blog posts and articles and videos and all of this stuff. And it was run by this big think tank of economists. And the economists had tagged the content as they went with whatever. You've seen this a lot, probably, where it's like, okay, this person says that it's about supply-side economics, and this person uses a slightly different tag that just says supply-side or whatever. And eventually what they had was like 600 discrete tags that had been used on this site. And the problem that they were having, the problem that they knew they had, was that they wanted to be able to connect people who were new to economics around topics. So they wanted to say, okay, we want to bring in graduate students who are from other fields who aren't studying economics but are interested in these issues because we think they should be multidisciplinary. And we want to have them come to a page that's about, let's say, macroeconomics, or finance reform. And we want them to be able to see all of the different pieces and how they fit together. And so we looked at these tags and we said, you know, you have no way to connect your content. You have no way to pull those things together for people because you're using 600 different tags. So instead of me going through and devising this taxonomy, which is a thing I can do and a thing that I've done, I pulled them together and I said, okay, let's cluster these. Let's talk through these. Let's make decisions about how you want to tell your story. And let's have those decisions be reflected in the categories we end up with. So what we did is we had these different subject matter experts, as well as people from the web team, people on the design side from the agency I was working with, and then some economists, their head of research, all of them together in the room. And they talked through the choices that were important. And what they were able to do was actually leave this room in 4 hours with a taxonomy of like 6 main topics and like 18 or 24 total subtopics within it. And they all agreed, these are the important ones to what we value and what story we're trying to tell, and here's what goes into each of these categories. Now, these are a huge number of people with PhDs getting together to argue all the time. Getting them to agree on something like this was massively important, because what this means is they're more likely to actually use it, right? Because they built it. They built this. They chose to do this. So now when they go in and they tag their content, they have this understanding that this is what they chose because of reasons. There's reasons behind it. It's not an arbitrary thing that some content expert just told them to do. The other way that I get people to take ownership is I get them to pair up when they're working on developing content. So I think it's really hard to tackle your content problems by yourself. And it's especially hard when you're handed some brief or like you're handed some design comps and you're like, just make the content fit those. And then you go back to your desk and you're like, okay, make the content fit those. And then you're like, well, I'm going to have a sandwich. I'm going to do that later. And then like 3 weeks go by and then all of a sudden you're like, oh crap, the content for the website's due tomorrow and I haven't done anything yet. So what I try to do is I do workshops where I get 2 people writing together. And I get them to actually start talking through the content challenges and talking through the content model and talking through how they're going to approach the writing or editing process that they need to do. And whether that's moving from big blobs of content to chunks of content, or moving from very like organization-centered content to more user-centered content, they're able to talk it through together and feel like they're in it together, not like they're alone at their desk trying to muddle through this huge mass of stuff that they're supposed to do. And I think it helps them feel like there's somebody by their side going through with them. It makes them feel like they have somebody they're doing things with. And I think this is really important in our work. A lot of times we tend to feel like we're making web stuff for other people. And I really started looking at my work, particularly with content, as being around making decisions around content with people. Because when you get people involved in the process and you have them actually getting their hands dirty with the making of the site, that's when they get that ownership, because they feel involved at every single stage along the way. And it's doing that that really allows you to get to this place of commitment. Commitment for the long term. Commitment to actually live out whatever the vision for this site or app or experience is over time. So that you're not just saying like, oh yes, we made a beautiful thing, but the client or the marketing team or whoever turned it back into garbage 6 months later. So, but the thing about long-term commitment is I think it's a lot easier said than done. Because oftentimes we say, okay, here's the new content strategy, here's the new design, run with it. And when people try to run with it, they end up feeling a little bit overwhelmed. They're really trying. They want to get there. You've engaged them. You've taught them some things. You've gotten them involved in the process. They're excited, and then they jump off the cliff. Because they're trying to jump toward the goal rather than taking measured steps to get there. So I'm always looking for ways that I can give people a map. So I'm not just giving them this like one moment in time answer to their web problems. I'm giving them a map for the longer term, and I can say, okay, where are we trying to get, and how do we keep on moving toward it? So maps are the things that really connect vision, right? This like, we will be the blah, 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 blah leader and blah, 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 to the daily operations, to like, okay, I understand why I don't just upload my PDFs to the website and instead think about what the web audience needs and then write specific copy that works on mobile. I understand why that matters to my organization. I understand why this is actually something that I'm doing, why I need to change my practice. So again, I'll go to one last parallel from my lovely city of Philadelphia. And this one's back in South Philly, and this is actually just a couple blocks from that first photo I showed you where I live. It's this neighborhood called East Passyunk. Now, East Passyunk was this Italian-American immigrant neighborhood, starting in about the turn of the 20th century. And until the 70s, it was this sort of thriving Italian-American neighborhood with all these like red and white tablecloth restaurants up and down the street, and you would still hear people speaking in Italian. Sometimes you even still do. But in the 70s, a ton of people left for the suburbs, like it happened in a lot of America. So a lot of families moved out of this neighborhood, and it became kind of half empty, and the people who were left were getting older. And the neighborhood just wasn't evolving. And like so much of Philly, it was covered in garbage. And so this is a neighborhood, though, that's really close to the center of the city. It's got all of these great storefronts. It's really designed to be this sort of thriving, shopping, restaurant-y place. So this group got together, the Passyunk Revitalization Corporation. And what they said was, how do we change this? How do we turn this from a neighborhood that's in decline to a neighborhood that's going to thrive? And what does it mean to thrive for this neighborhood? And what they decided was that thriving for that neighborhood meant not just sort of like chain stores and fancy restaurants that only people who lived in other areas of the city would come to just do an evening of going out or just to go shopping. They wanted it to have some of that, but they also wanted it to have places where locals would go on a regular. A place where you could pop out from your house if you lived around the corner and get a good beer. A normal place where you could pick up some groceries. And so what they started doing is they started putting that vision to work, and they built out this roadmap. And for them, their roadmap looked like this. They said, okay, we're going to purchase property that's empty on this street. And there's a lot of it. So we're going to purchase empty property that's pretty cheap. And we're going to revitalize it and rent it to people who want to open local businesses. That first photo there is this restaurant, Nord. It's one of the restaurants right in my neighborhood. And it's one of my favorite ones. It's beautifully redone. And the chef lives in an apartment that they made for him up above the restaurant. It's this thriving restaurant packed every night. You can't get in. And they started using the income they're getting from businesses like that to invest in things like neighborhood cleanup. So they have neighborhood cleanup crews that come around and keep the area clean. And they're also able to do long-term planning. Because they have this kind of consistent source of income, they're able to say, okay, so this year we're actually going to redo this one entry to this neighborhood. There's this one little street where it's got a little, triangular section, and it's kind of dirty and abandoned right now. We're going to turn that into a little pocket park. And they can do that. They can do that because they didn't try to do everything all at once. But because they said that if we improve the neighborhood over time, then we can make larger and larger improvements as we go. And we can build our way toward a thriving place. So I think we can do this in our projects too. And it really starts with defining where we're headed. You really have to know what it is that you're trying to do with content for the long haul, not just what you're going to do to get some copy into your design so you can get the design out the door. But what does it mean for this organization to have successful content in the long term? I start putting this into stuff that looks a little bit like product roadmaps, actually. I think that they're a pretty similar tool, but really focusing them in on content specifically. So we might say that our goal is something like this. For a lot of organizations, it's taking these massive amounts of unstructured content and turning them into something structured and modular that they can use in different places. For other organizations, maybe Verizon, it's a matter of taking this overwhelming amount of stuff and turning it into something that's governed, where people actually know who's doing what and why we're publishing different things to the website. In most organizations, there's a need to move from content that's being churned out, content that's produced by some sort of content marketing arm that's decided that we need to have 25 blog posts and 10 different interviews and 5 videos and whatever it is that they think is going to go viral, instead of churning out more and more stuff, getting to a place where content is purposeful, where we know that every piece of content we're producing is answering some users' needs. Those are probably long-term changes for content in most organizations. So what we do in order to actually get there is we start breaking that down into some potential projects. So this is actually me at a workshop a couple of months ago that we did for A List Apart. And at A List Apart, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with it, web magazine's been around for a long time. And one of the things we wanted to do was make sure that we were reaching out to kind of a newer, younger generation of readers. There's a huge number of people who've entered the web field in the past few years, right? It's been explosive growth, the tech industry. And not all of those people necessarily know about the history of a list apart and it's, the first place that this or that was published. How do we reach more of those readers? We had other content questions too, like how do we get a more diverse base of authors? How do we bring more new voices to the magazine? So we had these big ideas for content, and what we did is we actually got everybody together and we brainstormed a million little ideas. What are the different things we could do that would help us reach these goals? And we talked them through. Which ones are viable? Which ones are most helpful, most important? What should we start with? As we started identifying those potential projects, identifying the things we could actually foreseeably do with content, we then started breaking down all of those big steps into smaller, more tactical things we could actually remember and stick with. And I think this is where all of you come in, right? Because if you're working on the web, you're probably pretty familiar with what it takes to actually make something successful on the web. So you're in a position to take a big goal with content and break it down into smaller projects. People do it over time. Break it down into like, okay, well, this is going to require one new template in the CMS, but this is going to be something that's going to require like a much more massive overhaul. So maybe we start with this and move to that. So that insight that you can bring can help people create projects they can implement over time. Along the way, it's also important to make sure you're deciding who's going to lead each of these things, who's going to be in charge of stuff. Like anybody who does a product management approach, you know that people need to have some sense of responsibility to different actions. If it's just sort of like a list of tasks and nobody assigned to them, nothing happens. And you're also looking for a cadence for your progress. So when are things going to happen? How much time do we need to get this done? And how do we maintain that momentum? Oftentimes I'll do sessions where I start out getting all of the different things we want to do on sticky notes and just breaking them out and aligning them on a wall and starting to say, how do these projects layer together? Who is going to be doing them and when are they going to happen? And one of the most important things that I like to do when I'm road mapping out content is to think about what the very first step is for each of the projects we identify. So that when the person who's responsible for them actually has to start doing it, they already have the first step and they already go, oh yeah, that's where I need to begin. I know where I need to begin now. I think in this way, maps are really what help us stay moving on our projects. They give us that momentum with content that oftentimes we otherwise lose. And that's how we end up with those sites that have been abandoned for years and years, and all those content messes you're trying to mop up later. Ultimately, I think that content just is chaotic. I wish it were perfectly controllable. Oh, wow, hi. Cool. Good slides. I have 2 minutes and 20 seconds. So that's okay, we're almost at the end. I wish that content were perfectly controllable. I can tell you, I love to control stuff, right? Like, I love being in charge and being like, I'm gonna fix this and do this and that and that and that. And I bet a lot of you do too. But I don't think that you can with content. I think content just is chaotic. And it's chaotic actually because people are chaotic. People are messy and people are weird. Content's made by humans, so of course it's gonna be a pain to deal with. We're a pain to deal with. So I spent a lot of time on my projects really trying to be like, how do I wrap this all up with a bow? Like, how do I make the content perfect? How do I make the content perfect? That's my job, I'm a content strategist. What I realized is a lot more successful if we take a moment to go, okay, we're not here to make things perfect. That's actually not the most important thing. If we accept that the web is something that ebbs and flows, and our content needs to ebb and flow on our websites, then we also have to accept that it ebbs and flows through an organization and all the people who touch it along the way. So instead of trying to fix that, I think we make the most impact when we can see our work as web experts as being an opportunity to get other people to see their content differently and to start letting change take root in their organizations. And ultimately, that's what I think this is about. I think that when you work with content on the web, what you're really working with is helping people work through change. And that's the most effective place that we can have if we want to fight against the chaos. Thank you.